everyone. I just had to hide something. Trying something new today. We're doing our first digital lecture. And today our topic is going to be the start of the New Deal. And primarily we are going to be focusing on FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his first 100 days in office. Now, it's important before we get into FDR to remind ourselves of what exactly America had as far as leadership before he came into office. Herbert Hoover had been our president during the crash. And if you recall, he was kind of a do nothing president as far as getting our nation up and running again. His first response was to quite literally do nothing. And after that, he tried voluntary measures, expecting the American public to just, of their own good hearts, and businesses, more importantly, of their own good hearts, to make sacrifices in order to get the country up and running again. Long story short, that didn't go so well. And by the time FDR came into office, the American public was really looking for a decisive leader and somebody who would bring action and stability back to the nation. So let's look again. What exactly was FDR facing when he came into office? Well, we were at a 25% unemployment rate nationwide. Some places and some certain groups, such as African Americans, facing unemployment as high as 50%. The stock market had fallen by 85% since 1929. So clearly, we do not have any growth happening during that time period. Bank failures are at a record number, topping out in 1933 at 9,000 banks that had closed their doors since the start of all of this. Farmers were struggling under crushing debt, many of them facing foreclosure and having to leave their homes and their farms. And then we had also the ecological disaster of the Dust Bowl that forced many more to leave, uproot, and find something else to keep them going during this time. So what does this leave us with? Well, it leaves us with a lot of people out of work, a lot of people struggling, really high rates of homelessness. I have a picture down below here of a Hooverville in Seattle in 1933, and you can see, this is just essentially what we might refer to as a shanty town. Homes made of, scrap wood and metal, hastily built. You can imagine it's not so nice to live in one of these kind of makeshift buildings. And a lot of Americans looking for help and guidance. And you can see this exemplified by the photo I have up here of a New York City bread line in 1932. Oh, excuse me. Oh, geez. There we go. You can see the line actually circles back around a block, right? Just how long and impressive that is, or astounding might be a better word. So, long story short, what is FDR facing? A hot mess. Okay, well, he's a smart guy, right? He had the best schools, had the best education, and he does have experience in government. So, what does he decide to do first? Now, also important to mention here is that FDR did not make decisions alone. He really depended on a lot of experts and surrounding himself with the best and the brightest. That's what we call the brain trust that I mentioned earlier. And you can find reference to that in those notes about FDR. I'll repost those as well, just to refresh your memory. So FDR, along with his brain trust, what does he decide to do first? Well, first thing, or one of the first things he decides to do is try to stop some of the panic that is filling Americans' hearts and minds. Remember, it is this panic that led Americans to, storm the banks and try to get all their money out, which did not help anything, right? That just caused more bank failures and more business failures because of those bank failures. So what do you do when your constituency, the public, is in a state of panic? How do you address that and calm everybody down? Well, FDR actually had this brilliant idea, which sounds really simple now, but was groundbreaking then. He thought, Why don't I just talk to them? Nowadays, that seems so normal, right? We have a president that tweets all the time. We expect, especially right now among the coronavirus, to hear from our president and our governors daily. But back in the 1930s, that didn't happen. In fact, it had never happened before. So, how does FDR go about this? Remember, it's still in the 1930s. We don't have TV yet. Well, he gets on the radio, another great invention that had, taken off during the 1920s and most Americans had access to. So FDR started these things called fireside chats, where you would get on the radio in the evening time, hence the fireside part, and explain to the American public what was going on, explain bills that had just been passed, explain new policies. And as I mentioned before, this was really groundbreaking because no American president had done anything close to this before. Now, the bigger question is, did it work? If his goal was to calm down the American people, was he successful in doing that? Well, let's take a look at the very first fireside chat that FDR broadcast together. So, this very first one was put out on March 13th, 1933. And specifically, he was addressing the emergency banking bill, which was a 4-day bank holiday, meaning the banks closed for 4 days. And the idea behind this was to try to give banks some time to, get their books in order and also some time to restock the currency. Remember, that was part of the reason that a lot of these banks were failing in the first place. So let's take a second and listen to a little bit of this very first fireside chat.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be. I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations, and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen. I owe this in particular because of the fortitude and the good temper with which everybody has accepted the inconvenience and the hardships of the banking holiday. And I know that when you understand what we in Washington have been about, I shall continue to have your cooperation as fully as I have had your sympathy and your help during the past week. First of all, let me state the simple fact that when you deposit money in a bank, the bank does not put the money into a safe deposit vault. It invests your money in many different forms of credit, in bonds, in commercial paper, in mortgages, and in many other kinds of loans. In other words, the bank puts your money to work to keep the wheels of industry and of agriculture turning round.
All right, we'll pause there a second. Now let's just go back a moment and think about this question again. Well, what would be effective about a speech like this? And up here, just to kind of clue you in, we have a picture of some Americans who are listening in to one of these fireside chats. Well, first thing I'd like to point out is his voice, right? His voice is very calm, reassuring. He's not speaking with a lot of panic in his voice. That all by itself could have made a lot of Americans feel better. Now, also think about some of the language he's using. He's not being really fancy and academic, right? He's using really plain and straightforward language for the time to help explain something that's kind of complicated to the American public and in a way that would be accessible to everybody. So, without further ado, I would like you to go to your first assignment. So after you read through this, go ahead and pause the video lecture. Maybe you've already paused it. I'd like you to go to assignment number 1 for this first section. It's titled FDR's First Fireside Chat. And here you can listen to the full well, not the full broadcast, but the rest of the excerpt. And also I have posted in there a link to the transcript so you can read along as well. And as you're completing this assignment, I really want you to think about how are Americans feeling in 1933 and what's so powerful about what he's doing here. So go ahead, I'll pause myself here, and I'd like you to pause the video and go ahead and complete that first assignment. All right, welcome back. So we will go over that as well as this next assignment on Thursday or Friday of this week. So what else did FDR do besides getting the public to kind of calm down and easing some of that fear and that panic that had been so pressing on Americans during the early 1930s? Well, he got straight to work, okay? He wasn't just talking a good talk, he was walking the walk, right? And really making sure that our nation and our government was acting in order to improve the economy and improve the situation of the average American. So in his first 100 days in office, he actually passed 15 bills. This is a pretty high number for the time. And he continued this pattern throughout his first term, pushing for legislation laws that would address the nation's needs. Now, these different bills became known as FDR's alphabet soup, and they were called that because they were usually referred to by their acronyms. So I have some examples over here, the TVA, the WPA, the AAA. Over here we have an emblem of the CCC, Roosevelt's favorite program of all the programs that he developed. So what was the purpose of all of these programs? Well, generally they fell under three different categories, and there was some overlap. Some of these programs would kind of, play more than one role. But we call them the three R's. They fell under relief. So these programs would be things that were directly trying to help people who were suffering from the poor economy. So an example of this would be programs that provided jobs for people or improved their living conditions, maybe brought in things like electricity or clean water, things like that. Another category in the three R's would be recovery. So these would be measures and programs that would help jumpstart the economy. So get people spending again, get businesses opening again, get people, trusting the banking system again, all of those kinds of things. And the last category that these programs fell into is reform. So these would be laws and government agencies that would prevent another economic disaster. These are kind of like some of the measures that we saw President Teddy Roosevelt and President Wilson pass in the progressive era. So things that were trying to fix some of the problems that made this big mess in the first place so that we don't run into another Great Depression. So now I would like you to go on to your second assignment, which is to learn more about some of these programs. So for this assignment and looking deeper into FDR's alphabet soup, you are going to complete the assignment, FDR's alphabet soup. And for this, you'll need to read part of section 1 in chapter 22, so 22.1, to complete the assignment. And the reading will be attached in the actual assignment on Google Classroom. All right, everybody, that was our intro to the New Deal. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.